pure in its fun.
Oh my God. It goes good.
You know, when people talk about the newer model and they're like, well, they put a new body on it, it's the same chassis from 4 years ago, right? This car, think about it, basically the same as it was 20 years ago.
Right.
And they just kept jazzing it up, you know, throwing bits and pieces on it to try and refine it, but not a whole lot changed.
Like you were talking about the F1. This is similar. No power steering. I don't think you have any power brake. You got no stability control. You got no traction control. You know, so there. It's the F1 of its day. There you go. Welcome to an episode of Jay Leno's Garage. Today we're featuring one of the most iconic automobiles. This is the 1989 25th Anniversary Lamborghini Countach. Well, if you watch these videos, you see my Countach. Mine's an 87. I've been driving it for 40 years. It's got 70-something thousand miles on it. It's been a wonderful car. You know, it's a classic example. If you just use these things, they last forever. If you put them in a garage and put a towel over it or a sheet over it and call it a collector car, then you have to recommission them when you pull them out. But if you use them all the time and you don't beat them too badly, oh, and try not to get them wet. That's another thing too. But then they'll last a long time. This one belongs to a friend of ours, Alex Grappo. Alex, come on in. Let's give a plug to your coffee company. It's Drive Coffee, correct?
Yes, it's called Drive Coffee. You can find it at drivecoffee.com. And we've also got our own YouTube channel now where we do some fun things with this car and other cool cars and adventures we go on with the company. And we're just at Drive Coffee on YouTube as well.
Well, coffee and driving, the two go together. People always drive and drink coffee. Not
Absolutely.
me, I'm not a coffee drinker, but that's okay. But let's talk about this car. Now, this car was done under the tutelage of Chrysler Corporation, right?
Yeah, so really with the Countach, like one of the coolest things about this is that it actually spanned almost 2 decades for sale. In fact, the first prototype was shown in 1970.
Right.
And Lamborghini changed hands multiple times during the lifespan of the Countach. So while Chrysler had it at one point, it started under the leadership of Ferruccio Lamborghini.
Right.
In fact, it was one of the last cars that he oversaw.
And this was the replacement for what I think was one of the most beautiful cars of all time, the Lamborghini Miura. And I remember seeing this initially and being a little disappointed because, you know, to me, the most exciting Italian cars have both a feminine and a masculine element to them. You know, they're curvaceous and pretty, yet they're also muscular with big engines. You know, I mean, there's something, and it's funny how that works because when I ask women which one do you like, oh, they go for the Miura. Men pick the Countach, women always like the Miura. But when you take a car like an XKE, which is the ultimate masculine and feminine in the same form, both like it equally as much.
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about it too, it's so funny, right, that when you look at the context of history, it's crazy to think that the business plan as they're sitting in a boardroom, or if it was Italy, it was probably over lunch and a few glasses of wine and some great food. But, you know, the whole business plan for the Countach was, oh, we need to make something that looks better than the Miura and is also more practical than the Miura, which, as you said, I personally think is one of the most beautiful cars of all time. And in fact, I mean, Frank Sinatra drove a Miura, so I mean, if that doesn't make it also one of the coolest cars, then I don't know what does. But yeah, that was the original intent behind the Countach, is to replace the Miura.
Well, you know, I used to open for Miles Davis, and Miles had a Miura, and the cops would stop him. He was like the angriest guy I ever met, and especially in New England at that time, and with good reason, because hey, whose car is this? They didn't believe that this successful black man was successful enough to buy this car. They'd always pull him over and ask for the registry, double check. Oh, Miles, oh, I know that now. Oh, you're a musician. But it used to just, I mean, well, I see why he was angry. They call it the first supercar. You know, I kind of consider the Mercedes Gullwing to be the first supercar, but I see why the Miura would get that, because the engine was transverse and it was a V12 and it just had all these really kind of cool things going for it.
Yeah, and you know, the craziest thing too is when you think about these cars, Their origin story actually dates back to World War II and the post-war economy in Europe that allowed Ferruccio Lamborghini to get his start. And in fact, his whole business plan was to use surplus military engines in tractors. And what he did that was really unique is he created a fuel atomizer that he later patented that I believe allowed the diesel engines to be started more easily for these tractors, but it was some sort of fuel atomizer, and that's what originally made his tractors unique. So he would take surplus military engines, put them in tractors, and then they're very practical tractors. And agriculture and industry was one of the first things that was helping post-war Europe get going. So he took, his profits and the money that he's making from that business to then, grow himself and eventually put that into Lamborghini. Now it's funny because the story still kind of differs about what actually happened, but he bought a Ferrari 250, allegedly was having issues with the clutch, and
you don't know how to drive, get out.
And Enzo basically said, I think the problem is the tractor driver, not the Ferrari.
Well, that's what's funny you say that, because Ferrari started more car companies. Peter Monteverdi, who built the Monteverdi in there, he brought it in. He had a clutch problem. You know how to drive. And there were more FUs back and forward. Hilarious. More people started car companies because they got mad at Enzo Ferrari. It's really, really quite comical.
Yeah, and I think, both of the men at the time, I'm Italian myself, so you can imagine, the ego battles between two alpha Italian men. And I think they were smart and they knew to leverage that for PR and to help both of their companies grow.
Ferrari was smart because he went into racing. Lamborghini was smart because he didn't go into racing. He didn't fall into the trap of I have to win at any cost and all his businesses fall apart. He wanted to build road cars that were not necessarily racing machines, but just the best possible road car they could. And that original Lamborghini V12, just brilliant. Built by Bizzarini, originally designed, and all the other guys got involved with it too. It was smoother, it was quieter. It was just a wonderful, wonderful engine.
Well, I think one of my personal favorite stories about Lamborghini, and I think that's also why for so long, like Ferraris were track and performance focused, and Lamborghinis were really all about outrageousness and looks and whatnot. And part of the reason for that was apparently Ferruccio Lamborghini raced one time, and it was at the Mille Miglia in the 40s in Italy, which allegedly or supposedly ended with him crashing his car into a cafe, at which he, according to folklore, after he crashed into the cafe, asked the cafe owner he ordered a glass of wine, and he said, this is to toast the end of my racing career.
That's funny.
And it's funny how that single incident, really steered the direction of Lamborghini, that they were never about racing. They were never supposed to be the fastest on track. And it was really more about the outrageousness. And that's what led to these incredible shapes that no one has matched.
Even Lamborghini himself didn't really want the Miura to be built. That was sort of built kind of in secret. And the chassis came out, and Ferruccio Lamborghini was stunned when they showed the chassis, I think at the Geneva show, and people just went crazy. He goes, all right, well, just design some kind of body. And they figured they'd make a few, but then the demand was so great.
One of the crazy things about it is, to your point, I think they were saying that the engineers actually worked in secret, in some cases after hours, on the Miura. So it was never really supposed to happen. And they convinced Ferruccio that they needed something a little bit more extreme to be a business success.
But even Bizzarini himself, he's been here at the garage. He came to see me. I didn't speak Italian. He didn't speak English. There was a lot of I felt like I had a discussion with him. I had no idea what he was saying. But it was kind of fun. It was, it's so cool to have those kind of guys come to the shop and stop by. He was an old man 30 years ago when he came here. Well, he's probably the age I am now when he came here. But he just passed away at age, 94? And sharp right up until the end. And Marcello Gandini as well. What's fun I like about these cars is the Italians drew cars that look aerodynamic, but weren't necessarily aerodynamic. And to me, this is about as aerodynamic as a brick. I have a Countach, so I'm not, knocking his car. It's not aerodynamic at all. A Volkswagen is more aerodynamic than this, but it looks like, to the human eye, what aerodynamic would look like. Aerodynamic is a Prius. I rest my case. You know, if a Lamborghini looked like a Prius, so sometimes the best form for cutting through the wind, it doesn't look like the sexiest or the greatest or the best, you know?
You know, that's one of my favorite things about this car. And again, like going back into the historical context of why it looks this way, and also tying that back into, you know, the people that you were mentioning had stopped by that were involved in this process. I mean, first of all, you know, you think about car companies these days, and, you know, I think you've been to Pebble Beach a few times.
Yeah, many times.
Yeah, I heard. But, you know, you think about, you've got 747s flying Rolls Royces and Bugattis and cargo planes flying Koenigsegg's and all this to Pebble Beach. I mean, these were startups almost at the time. Like, even if they'd been around for a while, these companies were running on fumes. And in fact, again, that's the story of the Countach, is that they were putting all their chips on red, so to speak, to try and come up with a project that would truly be feasible as a business to save the company. And you think of those guys, whether it was, you know, some of the engine designers or, you know, the design studio Bertone that was involved in the design of the car. And these were their halo moonshot projects for these really small organizations that operated on very tight budgets. I mean, they had very simple looking manufacturing facilities. It was nothing like it is today with billion-dollar parent corporations and multi-million-dollar budgets. So these guys, they were in it for the passion, and they didn't have like, oh, you know, let's build this car and, you know, hopefully the numbers show it's going to check out. Hopefully it's going to work. It was like, no, this car has to work. Well, all our jobs depend on it.
And to get it to work, when you look at the prototype Countach, it's much sharper. There's no fender flares. There's no, I guess it's more aerodynamic. To make it truly roadworthy and not dangerous, you needed bigger tires in the back, which called for flares, fenders. You needed more air getting in here, so these aren't as attractive as the original one. You had the periscope with it, which you looked like through a periscope as a rearview mirror. I mean, it was really kind of cool. It was really unusual. Mine, this is more extreme than mine, and mine is way more extreme than the prototype. Mine was the first year, I think, the quattro valve with the fender flares on the back. Pirelli made a tire specifically for the Countach, bigger in back than front. You know, the Miura, all four tires were the same size. You know, that's how old it is, but not aerodynamic at all. When my yellow Miura, when you get that over 120, 125 miles an hour, I mean, you could actually go like this with the wheel, because, I mean, it's off the front end is coming off the ground. Yeah, I mean, it's really a little scary to drive. But that's why the Miura is a greater classic. It's greater as a classic than it was as a car.
Yeah, Lamborghini really moved away from the purity of the original form over time. And one of the things that was really crazy is that, I mean, I'll be the first to say, even with the 25th anniversary here, I think the Periscopa is probably the purest, most beautiful form of the Countach. And one of the crazy things about that, by the way, is that, you know, that car debuted in the early 70s, and when the first prototype of the Countach came out, which is in 1970, when Gandini designed that car, funny enough, another car that he designed right around the same time was a Lancia Stratos HF0.
Right.
Which, if you look at them two side by side, you know, if I was Lamborghini and I saw that design for Lancia, or the vice versa, you'd kind of be like, wait a second, I thought that was
wait a minute.
That looks kind of similar.
And it's funny, because to me, as we both agree, the Miura was the most beautiful. I have the Miura P400, which was the basic one. That's a really early car when you look at the build quality. The doors are thinner, everything's thinner. Then the S came out, a little bit bigger. And then the final one they built was the SV, where you had the split sump, you had bigger tires, had air conditioning. It was really on its way to being a real production car. But Lamborghini wanted something new every couple of years, boom, boom, boom. So, and this came in and was the exact opposite of the Miura. That was primarily feminine. This was primarily masculine.
Yeah, and if you think, again, going back to thinking about Miles Davis or Frank Sinatra, I mean, and then a Miura. I mean, the Miura was so well designed. It was so sleek, such a beautiful car. And you think of the style of the 60s and those types of people. And then this car really grew. It is a result of the climax of the 80s.
Yeah,
this is as much 80s as they could throw on the car, which it was all about over-the-top excess and being flashy.
If you want to see a fun piece on the Lamborghini Countach, Morley Safer from 60 Minutes back in the 80s went to Italy, and he did a show on the Countach, and he talked to the most Italian guy you could imagine with the suit. And he goes, when you take the woman, and he's smoking, you know, the woman that I had next to you in the car. And he goes, what about her luggage? Well, you have another car to carry the woman's luggage. Oh, I mean, hilarious. I mean, so sexist, so hilariously funny. And then Morley Safer says, if you're thinking of getting one of these, just remember they cost $100,000, which is what a decent Acura costs you now. But it's just such a funny period piece to see, and it's only 40 years ago. But yeah, but it's just interesting how the outlook, how different it was. But this was the car that was the Alpine stereo car on it. Every teenage boy had that poster on the wall.
Oh, I had this poster on my wall, and this for me was the dream car that I grew up with. And funny enough, my passion for cars, if I can point back to a single moment where it began, as I've mentioned on my videos before, I grew up overseas. It was 1994. I was living in Amman, Jordan at the time, and my mom was driving me home from school one day, and she told me a story about what she had seen earlier that day. And she said, I saw a red Lamborghini pull up to the side of the curb, and the door went up, and then a woman jumped in the car with the guy, and they drove off. And at that point on, I was fixated on this idea of like, I need to find that car and see what kind of car this was. Because at 5 years old, I thought that was the coolest story I'd ever heard in my life.
But that was the king of Jordan.
It wouldn't surprise me,
Well,
actually.
that was his, you know, he does a big car rally all the time. And every now and then I hear from him. And he had a Countach. So that's who had it, all these heads of state. The Shah of Iran, he had a Miura that was a Yota, they called it. It was a Miura S.
SVJ, I think it was.
SVJ, that's right. Yeah, it was the split sum car, and modified specifically for him. I remember Nicolas Cage bought it for like $400,000 back in there. Well, that's crazy, $400,000. Now they're $1 million, $2 million. But yeah, so it was just interesting.
Yeah, and you know, really, I think that's the Countach in a nutshell of why it's so cool, because you know, when you look at so many, and they're great cars, you know, Porsches and Ferraris, they were shaving ounces, they were putting up better lap times, they were more sophisticated engines. And it really, again, too, because the company was struggling so much, Lamborghini couldn't really compete on engineering at the time.
No.
So they had to compete through creativity and by being extreme. And when you look at so many ways that people try and compete by optimizing and making everything perfect, Lamborghini tried to compete by fun and shock factor and making people smile.
And this is really old school, the way this is built, the way the chassis is put together. This is not a light car. This car, I think my McLaren F1 is just a couple of hundred pounds shy of being half the weight of this car. Really, this thing is about 4,200 pounds, because you've got this massive steel cage, and you've got all these aluminum pieces around it, and you've got a pretty good sized motor in there too. So yeah, it's not a lightweight by any sense. And by modern standards, what is this, about 450 horse?
About that, yeah.
About 450, which now is, if you buy the base Corvette for 65 grand, you get 450 or something.
Yeah.
You don't get, I think you get more than that, 475. But it's just funny how the horsepower, because 450 back in the day, oh my God.
That was one of the biggest numbers at the time,
that's right.
actually,
That's
was
right, yeah.
450 horsepower. And it's funny too, actually, because while the top speed was rumored to be, I think, somewhere between 170, 180 miles an hour, technically speaking, although it wasn't a production car, this was one of the first production cars to hit 200 miles an hour.
Well,
because in the mid 70s, they produced 3 twin turbo ones. They were custom commissioned in Switzerland, not made by Lamborghini, but a private collector commissioned 3 twin turbo ones that I sure as heck wouldn't want to drive it to 200, but they were rumored to hit that.
I don't think aerodynamically this could hit 200, because, you know, when Carroll Shelby had the Cobra, he could only get a 427, massive horsepower, but because of the convertible, 165 was about the best. And then Pete Brock designed the Daytona Coupe with the camback, and then they started getting into the higher numbers. But I don't think, I remember these were rumored to go 186, but I don't know if anybody ever did. So I don't think, I mean, you could be right. I don't think they ever quite broke 200, but that never interested me, because you can't go 200 anywhere anyway.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it definitely sounds like attempted bragging rights of someone who had just wasted a lot of money on a custom twin turbo kit. He's like, no, it definitely goes 200. And
this,
for sure.
This is controversial, the wing. Now, I don't know, I know when Gandini designed it, he didn't, mine had a wing, and I took it off because Gandini said, what's the wing? Oh, yeah, sorry, get that thing out of here. Because I think I thought it was rather silly at the time, because it just slowed you down.
Yeah, I mean, what you did is definitely what a gentleman of class would do, as well as a thinking man, really, because this wing, I mean, again, it perfectly summarizes where the company was at the time. Like, this isn't engineering, this isn't downforce. I mean, you look at a new video on a new Porsche GT3 RS or a new Ferrari or even that crazy new Mustang. I was just watching that video the other day. I mean, they've got 3D models and aero and, you know, AI designing their downforce wings, and they were like, no, this definitely makes it look more like a spaceship. You should definitely put that on there. Well, it slows it down. Put it on anyway. It looks really cool. So it's completely non-functional. In fact, it slows it down.
Let's talk about your car. What's different here? Obviously, you have them side by side. You would recognize them both as Countaches, but these are much bigger. I think you get better air and better cooling to this. Although I never had a overheating problem with mine. It always ran pretty cool.
Yeah, so the 25th anniversary package, first of all, one of the really cool things about that is that the package was really designed and put together by Horatio Pagani, who now I think, you know, a lot of people refer to him as the modern day automotive Da Vinci. And he was tasked with, you know, bringing out the last hurrah of the Countach. And so a couple of things are different on this car. Number one, the larger scoops there, the wing. And then a lot of other, and of course, some of the side sills and whatnot, which we're seeing on the the 88.5 as well. They started introducing the side sills, but it's mainly, you know, the added body work is signature of the 25th anniversary. But a lot of it too is actually trying to bring it into the modern age. So just honestly, things like better air conditioning, more comfortable seats. Power seats was a big deal. Power windows, even though they're a little funky and kind of like upside down in reverse, the 20th anniversary was a lot about creature comforts and drivability.
And the windows are hilarious, because they call them the Wendy's single patty window. You can't get a double burger through it. You can only get you have to order 2 singles, and the guy slips them through the window when it comes. Because the window it's like this much. It's hilarious.
And you know why? Because the only thing it's really designed for actually is just to hang a cigarette out the window, I'm pretty sure, back then. So it's like, the windows are pretty much non-functional. I don't even know why they would put in that much work.
Well, you know, the reason they did it, at least Gordon Murray told me, why the window was only like this on the McLaren F1, because once you get up over 180, 200 miles an hour, there's so much pressure on you. You blow the windows out, because I know I did it on on the EcoJet car, the jet car we built, because it was a full window. Boom, just blew it right out. The idea was with this here, it would keep it stronger, or you'd have a solid piece and just move this part down. Because anything that can really go over 200 miles an hour really has that type of window until just about just about recently. I think that's probably why they did it here.
I've heard that that's why they did it, and I've also heard because they couldn't figure out, basically with the angles on here, how to get a window to fully roll down. And one of the cool things that I really love about this car is, again, this car is a time capsule of so many things that were going on. And really, it's connected to another kind of crazy car to me, which is the Cybertruck. So one of the things that's cool about this to me is that the only other car I can really think of that only has flat glass, which this car, all the glass on here is flat, it's not curved, is really the Cybertruck.
You know, that's a great analogy, because when the Cybertruck came out, it hit people like nothing else, because it didn't look anything like a truck. And when this came out in 1970, it didn't look anything like what cars look like. Cars look like XKEs, or maybe even a Stingray with the Mako Shark, but not this extreme. So this, I think that's an excellent analogy, because people, again, either were revolted by it or just thought it was the greatest thing in the world.
Well, and it's funny too, because one of the things to me that I've thought about, and again, I've been in my career, I've been in product development and then starting a company. We know how hard it is to bring a product to market. And one of the things that I found really cool is that the car was introduced at the 1970 Geneva Motor Show. However, the car didn't go on sale until 1974.
I know.
So when you look at the Cybertruck, it's about that same 4 or 5 years, and everyone's like, oh, you're never going to see that car. It's never going to see the light of day. It's never going to happen. So these revolutionary cars a lot of times take a while to work out. And funny enough, that's where the name Countach comes from, is apparently a designer looked at the design, and there was a Piedmontese slang term that apparently meant like sick, or like, oh, like, wow, oh my God. And the word was Countach or something like that. And that's where the name came from.
Now this is a European model?
This is a European spec car.
Because you have carburetors. My Countach was allegedly the last carbureted car sold in America. That's why I bought it, because I didn't want that fancy fuel injection. It was too complicated for people to figure out at the time. So I wanted carburetors. But yours being an '89, so it must have been European, because you couldn't bring a carbureted car into America by '89. I'm pretty sure, as I remember.
Yeah, so the US spec ones have fuel injection, and then these are the famous downdraft carbs, which apparently give it officially about 35 more horsepower.
Let's open it up. Ah, che bella machine. Well, there you go, the famous V12, minus 5.2 liter. Is this 5.2?
I believe this one's actually also 5.2 liter.
And it's a quattro valve, which was the big improvement from the old days. When it first came out, it had the side drafts and a 2-valve engine. Now it's a 4-valve engine. This is kind of like the Jaguar XKE, and it powered the company from the first day right up until literally the present day, when they've gone to different motors besides the V12. But the XK engine went from 1948 to the late 2000s, like 2015, 16, something like that. And this has powered Lamborghini all the way. I think the final version of this is what, 7.2 liter or something they finally took it out to in the Aventador and all. Just crazy horsepower, but just a wonderful, wonderful engine. This is like the small box Chevy of Italy. It was used for 50 years, and it served its stewardship admirably. It really is just a great, great motor. And it looks so incredibly complicated back in the day, but now, everything's easily accessible, The reason I like the carbureted cars is when I'm stuck, I could pop the air cleaner, pour gas down the throat of the carburetor, get it to fire, and get home, With fuel injection, I never knew what I was doing.
Yeah, I think, the other crazy thing about this engine is that there's something about a Lamborghini V12. A Lamborghini V12 has a way of kind of shaking the ground and reverberating through the air that's just so special. I mean, this car, it helps to really create the presence of this car, that you can truly even feel it through the ground when this car is going by. And it's just a testament to that engine.
And the fun thing is, everything is metal, like your oil cap here. It's threaded, it tightens down. It gives you a feel of quality. It just, again, it's like winding a mechanical watch. These Apple watches are great. There's no mechanical watches anywhere near it for accuracy, but it's something about before you go to bed. turning that crown
Yeah.
wheel and hearing those clicks. You know, it just makes it what it is. But very nicely done. And of course, it's 5-speed transmission with that totally unorthodox way the drive goes forward and then back down into the, yeah, really an interesting design.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you mentioned in your original video about the Countach is that this car, it's not for the faint of heart when you're driving it. I mean, that transmission really has to be muscled into each gear, and I think that's one of the things that surprised me first when I drove it, is just how much muscle and effort it takes to get it into gear and whatnot. And it's a car that just a tough kind of beast of a car, and you really have to.
Agricultural, I think, is the term.
It's probably a pretty good reference, that it lacks some of that finesse that Ferrari went for, but I think it's what helps create that true Lamborghini experience.
Well, let's take it for a spin and see what she does. I'm curious to see how different it is from mine.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Oh, I see a couple of things that are different. Oh, one right off the bat. And this controls the seat right here.
Yep.
Just move it forward and back. Is it back all the way?
Just need to turn the ignition and
right.
And it's probably already back all the way.
I see. Okay. All right. I think we're ready to go. Let me shut that. Sounds good. No power steering.
That's what I was saying.
It's a man's car, son.
Oh, you got to muscle your way through it.
You know, initial impression is it's a little more refined than mine. It's a little different than the F1. But like I always say, this is halfway in the development of the automobile. You know, if you figure about 1910 as the beginning of the cars, although they happened before that, but I mean real cars, and you go 50, 60 years, it takes you 1970, and then from 70 to here is almost the same amount of time, you know what I'm saying? So this is like the halfway point.
I never really thought of it that way, but that's a really good way to think about it. And again, it's crazy to think that this car is that old, and yet people, if they don't really know cars, they'll ask you, like, is it new? What is it? Because it still looks modern.
Well, put it this way, anybody my age that was in this in 1970 was born in the 1800s. If I drove this in 1970, I was born in 1896, right? I mean, isn't that hilarious?
So does it feel very different than your Countach?
No, it feels somewhat similar. Because the mechanicals are basically the same.
It's basically the same.
The chassis is the same. We just added a few refinements, electric windows, and mine's got roll-up windows.
You know, the Countach gets a really, like, anybody you talk to, it's like, oh, terrible to drive, right? Oh, they're really rough.
Well, you know, again, it depends where you're coming from. When I talk to guys like in their 30s that have never ridden old cars, they go, why is it so hard to steer? God, you have to press so hard on the brakes. So it's all what you're used to. I grew up with those kind of cars, so I kind of expect it.
Well, but I think in general, the Countach is really, it gets a lot of undeserved, negativity about the driving experience. Like, sure, it's like a little brutish, like it's a little bit hard to shift, and you got to use some muscle for steering. But other than that, like, I don't think the steering is horrible.
But
it rides nice.
Compared to what was out around at the time, it was better than anything that was around at the time. It's 50 years old. It's like saying, yeah, I got this guy, he's 55. He was a runner in high school, but he can do nothing now. Yeah, because he's 55 years old. Yeah. Most people have old tires, old gas, stuff sits around.
Well, and like that's what we were saying is impressive about the Duesenberg. Is the Duesenberg's like, the guy who was fast and he's 55 and he's still fast.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the carbureted cars like this just because I understand them more than, especially the early fuel injection.
Yeah, and just the raw power of this car.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun to drive.
And you know, it's funny, for being as old as it is, it's still such, it still feels quick.
Yeah, and the steering is only heavy at slow speed.
Yeah.
When you're under power, boy, it doesn't feel like power steering, but it's a lot lighter.
But if you feel the suspension, I mean, it's nice, it's comfortable, it's not too bad.
It's comfortable, and this tire is not a tread pattern indicative of this car. So it feels a little rougher than it should. If this had the proper Pirellis on it, it would probably feel a little bit different. I thought the tires might be hard because they were old. I think it's just a more aggressive tire pattern or something.
Yeah.
It's like it's probably got like an all-weather tire on it because you got snow in Denver and all that. Do you put snow tires on these things in the winter?
No, not on this car. We did actually on our YouTube channel, we drove it up I-70 in Colorado up into the mountains with a Christmas tree on it over winter.
That's funny.
And we have that was actually our first YouTube episode that we ever did on our channel, but that was just kind of like a fun thing. And no, but other than that, we don't really drive it in the snow that much, mainly just because we really worry in Colorado a lot about corrosion. They put like salt and mag chloride on the roads, and that's just, as much as it's fun to keep these cars on the road, that'll just eat up your car.
Yeah, and this is still bad metal season. You know, back the 80s, everybody's moving to galvanized steel, but it hasn't gotten there yet.
The funny thing about this car is, like, again, it is a big, heavy car, but once you kind of get into it, she feels a little light on her feet.
Hey, you know, for me, I got one. I know, I love them.
And again, it's like, it's so funny that the 25th anniversary, I mean, that was the end of the second decade. I mean, these days, you know, you hear about a car getting old, you know, when people talk about the newer model and they're like, well, they put a new body on, it's the same chassis from 4 years ago, right? This car, think about it, basically the same as it was 20 years ago.
Right.
And they just kept jazzing it up, you know, throwing bits and pieces on it to try and refine it, but not a whole lot changed.
Like you were talking about the F1. This is similar. No power steering. I don't think you have any power brake. You got no stability control. You got no traction control. You know, so there. It's the F1 of its day. There you go.
Well, that's a very high compliment, but it's, yeah, I mean, it was all down to the driver and technique and skill, which, speaking of which, one of the hard things about this car is the toe box is so narrow. Your feet are so close to the pedals. Half the time that I have to drive this, I take my shoes off.
That's when we built our Lotus Elan. We built our own pedal box, so you have normal size feet. Yeah. It really changed the whole car, because you're not like trying to drive with your big toe.
But see that V12 growl that this car has? There's you know, shakes the ground, and there's just nothing like it.
You're preaching to the converted.
I also often like to think about what it's like when, you know, you think about the first buyer of this car in 1989. And when did you buy yours?
87.
Oh, so you bought yours in 87. I was about to say, imagine the psychopath that bought this thing in 1989, and now we know what kind of person would buy them back then.
Right. That kind of psychopath.
And this car was actually originally sold in Italy, in the Emilia-Romagna region, which is right around where they were built. We don't know too much about, you know, who the buyer was or whatnot.
I don't think anybody in Italy can afford one of these cars these days. I don't think Ferrari, the tax man just comes after you and grabs everything.
Well, here's the most important question of the drive.
Yeah.
Is that, do you feel the difference in performance with that giant wing on the back, you know?
The synchros are very good in this. Transmission is good. You're not crunching them at all. Transmission's in very nice shape. Wow. What does this have, 15,000 kilometers on it?
Yeah.
So that's about what, 9,000 miles?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it still feels plenty tight.
The funniest thing about it too is that the manual says that the break-in period not to go above I want to say it was like 5,000 or 6,000
Right.
for the first 4,000 miles.
Yeah.
Which means half these collectors have cars that aren't even broken in.
Yeah, that's true.
Did you have to do any kind of engine rebuild on yours?
No, nothing.
In
Just
70,000
tune-ups.
miles, it's great.
I put the electronic ignition in it, but nothing major.
The ultimate Countach moment. A Countach next to a school bus.
That's funny.
Work hard, kids.
Is this a stock exhaust system, or did you put something?
Yeah, stock.
Huh?
Stock.
Yeah. Sounds good.
The Countach, it's so pure in its fun. And that's like, you can find faster, you can find better handling, you can find more mechanically and engineering impressive. But this car is just fun. And
Oh yeah, that's all how it makes you feel. That's
and
what it should
makes
be.
so many people smile when they see it. And it represents, right, more than a car, right? It being our poster car for so many people that were part of my generation, it not just represents fun, but it also just, this one car somehow captures like so many dreams of young people as we were growing up and like what we wanted to do one day. It's what it makes a Lamborghini a Lamborghini.
Alex, thanks for bringing this. You know, the only the Countach I have is mine, and they're really quite similar.
Well, it is always an absolute treat to hang out with you and
Oh yeah.
talk cars